right, the NFL Pro Bowl results have been revealed. I was going to make a video yesterday, feeling under the weather, a little under the weather today. If you want to call it a flu game, you can call it a flu game. I'm not going to tell you that you have to call it one, but if you do, so be it. But yeah, there's a lot wrong with these Pro Bowl results. I want to break it down for you guys, so let's hop right into the video. All right, so I want to start off with the running back selection here. I actually don't have too much to disagree with. Saquon Barkley, obvious Pro Bowler, right? Jahmyr Gibbs, in my eyes, especially how he's carried the last month for the Lions with Montgomery out, a clear Pro Bowler. I think there's a conversation to be had about Josh Jacobs versus Bijan Robinson. Bijan's had a really successful end of the year, but I ultimately do think that Josh Jacobs has just meant a little bit more to his team. Gibbs, Jacobs, and Bijan, all of their stats are close enough that realistically it was just, who do you prefer? And I get it, going with the guys who have helped lead their teams to better records at that point in time. On the AFC side, Derrick Henry, no doubter. Jonathan Taylor, the way he's closed out the year, he's a 1,250-yard rusher. Again, he's really finished the year strong. But I have to go James Cook over Joe Mixon. And Joe Mixon was fine, but, you know, Joe Mixon had only 12 more rushing yards, but James Cook had 5 additional touchdowns and averaged a full yard per carry more at this point than Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon missed some of the year due to injury, and I do feel really bad for him in that aspect, because I do think if he did play a full year, he probably would be a no doubt Pro Bowler. But when it's all said and done, at this point in time in the season, James Cook had a clearly better year than Joe Mixon and is on a better team. If you favored Josh Jacobs and Jahmyr Gibbs in a close battle over Bijan Robinson because of team success, I have no problem with it. But James Cook then needs to be on this list over Joe Mixon, especially considering statistically, I would argue Cook had a better year. Then we get to the wide receiver section. Justin Jefferson, to me, clear no doubt choice. CeeDee Lamb, I'm here for it. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm here for it. I would have had Malik Nabers as the 4th wide receiver over Terry McLaurin. And just some of the numbers, Malik Nabers was 3rd in the NFL in receptions, Terry McLaurin 20th. Nabers had 100 receptions this year. Malik Nabers was already a 100 reception level player in his rookie season. He's on the Giants dealing with that situation, and still statistically, I think he was better than Terry. Malik Nabers had 100 more receiving yards. The only thing different here was Terry McLaurin had 6 more touchdowns. And obviously, as a whole, Washington's offense was better than the New York Giants. Not really a hard thing there, but for me, Malik Nabers showed more this season. It's a little nitpicky, but I would go Nabers over Terry McLaurin. The 12 touchdowns from McLaurin, though, I'm not going to be like 2 on the Pro Bowler voter. Like, this isn't one of the more egregious snubs that they had. Just if I was the guy voting, Nabers would have been my 4th wide receiver, not Terry McLaurin. On the AFC side, no doubt you had to have Jamar Chase, the guy's going to win the Triple Crown. And Jerry Jeudy, I think, also really definitely should have been in there too. I believe he was top 8 in the NFL in receiving yards this year, and he's had like 4 different quarterbacks for the Browns. Jerry Jeudy's really had a resurgence here in Cleveland. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. would have been my 2nd wide receiver on here, but him and Jeudy both would have been locks for me. You could make the case whether you want to get rid of Nico or Zay. I probably lean getting rid of Nico. I understand that on a pure talent basis, Nico is better. At least I would take him over Zay, Jeudy, and even Brian Thomas at this point in time. But statistically this year, I just don't see how you leave Brian Thomas out. 80 receptions, 1,179 yards, and 10 touchdowns. And we still have a week to go, so the guy's going to break 1,200 yards his rookie season. That's just not something that happens all the time. Getting those yardages with double-digit touchdowns, I believe it's just Jamar Chase, Odell Beckham Jr., and Randy Moss are the guys that have done that. So Brian Thomas Jr. not being on here is certainly one of the more egregious snubs. He needs to be on here. If you want to get rid of Nico the way that I would have, just because he wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver, and in terms of team success, Zay had more. I think the Nico and Zay case is very close. I would slightly lean Zay, but again, Nico's the better player, so if you put him in there, I wouldn't have any complaints. But Brian Thomas Jr. needs to have been a Pro Bowler, and it's an egregious snub. In the tight end section, I have no complaint about the NFC tight ends. George Kittle and Trey McBride are the two more talented tight ends in the NFC, and I do think that they had the best statistical seasons as well. In the AFC, you had no choice but to include Brock Bowers. This guy is having an absolutely monster rookie campaign, and if Jaden Daniels wasn't so good, I think should get serious consideration for Rookie of the Year. He would be second on my ballot. The records that this guy broke, and the fact that he was just clear-cut the best statistical tight end. Travis Kelce on here, I'm going to be honest, I don't think Kelce should have made it this year. I think there was a clear dip off in his performance, and I would have gone with Jonnu Smith. Jonnu had more yards and touchdowns this year than Travis Kelce. Kelce did have him beaten in receptions, but Jonnu had more yards on less catches and had more touchdowns this year. The Dolphins have 0 Pro Bowlers this year, which if you're a Dolphins fan, I'm sure you're pissed off about that. I think Jonnu Smith should have been one of those guys, and I would have put him in over Travis Kelce. When it comes to offensive line, I don't really have any complaints. I think it's a hard position to statistically compare. Johnson, Sewell, Wirfs, those feel like 3 of the best tackles in the NFC, Dawkins, Slater, and Tunsil. Again, when it comes to offensive line and defensive back, I think stat watching is a very trap, thing that people could fall into. And we'll talk about that with defensive backs. But when it comes to offensive line and defensive back, I think the eye test plays a huge role here. And from a tackles perspective, these are for sure the best tackles in football. I feel the same way about the center selections. I also want to point out, pretty cool, Jason Kelce handpicked his, replacement in Cam Jurgens on the Eagles 2 years ago, helped train him. In the first year that Kelce's gone, Cam Jurgens becomes a Pro Bowler. Like, Philly does offensive line so great, whether it's Stoutland, Roseman, or just the whole operation. I think it deserves some love. From a guard perspective, Dickerson, Lindstrom, Tyler Smith, and then Quentin Nelson, Trey Smith, and Joe Tooney. Again, no real complaints from me here. I think offensive line is just very, very talent based, and that's, it's hard to say snub or not snub when it's a position that's just so much based on talent. It's really an eye test thing. I think all of these guys are fine. Interior defensive linemen, Jalen Carter, Dexter Lawrence, and Vita Vea for the NFC. I think that these are the right picks. Dexter Lawrence is an absolute freak. He had the most sacks of any defensive tackle, and he played like 12 games this year. Guy's just an absolute unit. Jalen Carter has really broken out this year, and Vita Vea for the last, half decade has just been an absolute beast in the middle. In the AFC side, Chris Jones and Cam Hayward, I like those two selections. I would actually replace Matabuke with Zach Sealer from the Miami Dolphins. The guy had more tackles for loss and more sacks. I think that Matabuke solely got in on a Ravens are a better team and he's got more name value, but when you compare their season statistically, to me it's not even a conversation. Sealer on the Dolphins just had a much, much better year than Matabuke. You could pull up all the stats on your own time or on ESPN, Football Reference, whatever you want to use, but a guy beat him in every statistical category. In a position where I do think interior defensive linemen stats do go away in telling a story on the defensive line, not so much in the defensive back, but yeah, I would have gone Sealer over Matabuke. On the defensive end side of things, Bosa, Parsons, and Rashawn Gary. I don't have no problem with Bosa and Parsons. Even on a year where those guys both missed time, their stats are still absolutely incredible and at the top of the league, or the conference, in their position. I would have gone Leonard Williams over Rashawn Gary. Leonard Williams is an absolute beast this year. He had 2.5 more sacks, doubled the tackles for loss, and had that 100-yard pick six as a defensive end. It's just crazy to me that guy got left off of this list. Again, I think some of it was just, hey, are you on a great team and did solid this year? You get to be a Pro Bowler. And in reality, the NFL, from a Pro Bowl perspective, I think some more individual stats could be awarded, and I would go Leonard Williams over Rashawn Gary. On the AFC side of things, Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson, those were no doubt locks to me. Lead the NFL in sacks, absolute beast. Max Crosby, I think from a talent perspective, yes, he is one of the best players, but he didn't play half the season, and I would have gone Danielle Hunter over him. Danielle Hunter had more sacks, 12 to 7.5, had more pressures, and had the highest pressure percentage in the NFL. And yes, I'm looking at my notes on my phone here if you guys haven't noticed, but I would have easily gone Danielle Hunter over Max Crosby. honestly, the Houston Texans duo, Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter, you could have take your pick of either one of those guys to go in over Crosby. I lean Danielle Hunter. Obviously, Will Anderson Jr. missed a couple games, and if he had played a full season, his stats would have been excellent. You could say the same for Max Crosby, so I would have gone Danielle Hunter here. I think he is definitely one of the bigger, more egregious snubs on the list. The inside middle linebackers, I actually have no problem with any of the selections here. Fred Warner doesn't jump off of the page statistically, but some things are just an eye test. When you watch Fred Warner play, you can tell that this is the best linebacker in the sport. The guy is all over the field, pass coverage, run stopping, it doesn't matter. A secure tackler, I get it again. You go and read the box score in the stat sheet. This guy isn't going to jump off the page statistically, but when you see him play, you know he's got that dog in him. Zach Bond had the best statistical year of any NFC linebacker, led the NFC, I believe, in tackles from the linebacker position. The guy was an absolute beast this year for Philly. What an absolute steal and find by this team. Roquan Smith, I think he's the second best linebacker in all of football. The stats back that up, and Zaire Franklin had the best statistical year of any linebacker in the sport. It was just a stat sheet stuffer. Nothing wrong with the inside middle linebacker selections. The outside linebacker selection, I think I might stir up some controversy here. Grenard and Van Ginkel, absolutely great. Brian Flores has used them in such a fantastic way this year. I think both are deserving of being here. I think Jared Verse is getting a little overrated. I get it, he's going to win the Defensive Rookie of the Year, and that could be a conversation for another day. But in terms of an outside linebacker perspective, I would have gone with Brian Burns. He's listed as an outside linebacker on ESPN. I don't know if the NFL viewed him as a defensive end or an outside linebacker. It could be a little wishy-washy sometimes, but if not, I would have gone Dante Fowler or Frankie Louvu on the Commanders. I think there is a couple guys that should have been on here over Jared Verse. I think this was more of a hype pick. We like the Rams. We like building a new star. That clearly was the choice behind the selection here, but those three guys, I think, all definitively had better seasons than Jared Verse. Maybe the NFL viewed Brian Burns as a defensive end, but there's no way you viewed both Louvu and Fowler as defensive ends, so something needs to change there. On the AFC side, Bonito and TJ Watt, clear choices to me. Great, excellent players. TJ might be going and getting the Defensive Player of the Year, which is kind of odd because I don't know if this is his most deserving season, but I thought he was deserving last year, so maybe it's a makeup award. Khalil Mack here from the Chargers is a miss for me. Kyle Van Noy on the Ravens has been absolutely outstanding this year. He's pretty much better than him in almost every statistical category. He has double his sacks, and I think he's a much better coverage linebacker as well. When you're an outside linebacker, yes, you do have the responsibility of rushing the passer and being a run stopper, but you also have to drop back into coverage. I think Van Noy has just had a much better season here than Khalil Mack, and I think that this was a snub. Now, cornerback is one of the more subjective positions in the NFL because I don't think that stats tell a full story. I think stats tell some of a story. You know, if you're an interception leader like Byron Murphy, I think you should be awarded for that, or Deron Bland last year when he had that pick six record. But I also don't think interceptions tell the full story at the cornerback position, just because if you're playing really good at corner, then you are stopping people from throwing the ball in your direction, and that doesn't always equate to stats. So Jalen Johnson, I'm cool with. Byron Murphy, I'm cool with. I would take Quinyon Mitchell on the Eagles over J.C. Horn and Devin Witherspoon. You can make your pick there. Some of it just comes down to pure talent and eye test. So I would have J.C. Horn be my guy off and Devin Witherspoon in. You know, you could have that conversation there, but I do think that from a pure talent perspective, Quinyon Mitchell was robbed here. I also do think that AJ Terrell is one of the better corners in football, and you could have made a case for him. I think he is one of those last guy out or first guy in spots, but Quinyon Mitchell of the Eagles, I think he had an outstanding year. The guy gave like one touchdown catch all year, and it was at the end of the season versus the Cowboys. The guy's been an absolute stud this year. No reason he shouldn't be in. In the AFC, Stingley, Pat Surtain, and Marlon Humphrey all definitely should have been in here. Marlon Humphrey has a case for Defensive Player of the Year this year, and Stingley and Pat Surtain are probably the two best corners in all of football, period. But I'm taking Trent McDuffie over Denzel Ward. Trent McDuffie is the most versatile corner in football. This guy can be, last year he was the best nickel corner in football, and this year, in my opinion, he's a top 5 outside corner. Again, when you start talking about statistics, it's really tough to get into because statistics don't tell the full stories with DBs, but the eye test, McDuffie should be a Pro Bowler. Let's just be honest here. I love Denzel Ward too. And looking at this graphic, I just am reminded that the AFC, we talk about how the AFC has way better quarterbacks than the NFC. I also think they have way better cornerbacks. And then we get to the safeties. I don't actually have a real problem here. I understand that, you know, CJ Gardner-Johnson, some people wish that he had made it because of all the interceptions that he's had. But being an Eagles fan and watching the Eagles play and watching some of these other games closely, I would lean Budda Baker and Brian Branch over CJ. And that's coming from an Eagles fan. Budda Baker led the NFL in tackles this year from the safety possession. And I get it. Some of that is that his linebackers aren't that good, but Budda Baker was constantly having to clean up plays for this Cardinals defense. Brian Branch is, you know, very similar to Kyle Hamilton. Those guys are both just all over the field. I do think that it was a correct selection to have both of them on there. And Derwin James has really shown out this year for the Chargers with Minter and Harbaugh. I have no problem there. And then in the free safety market, McKinney and Minkah Fitzpatrick, those are the clear choices for me. McKinney has a ton of interceptions, has been a great addition. Again, interceptions don't tell the full story, but if you have a ton of them, you're usually doing something right. And Minkah Fitzpatrick is just an absolute beast. I don't really have any thoughts on the special teamers. I think that they were the fine selections. I'm not going to get into it here. In the quarterback situation, I do think that the AFC quarterbacks are absolutely correct. Allen, Burrow, Lamar. I think Burrow and Lamar were for sure. They had to be in there. Burrow, 42 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, leads the NFL in passing. If his team had 10 or 11 wins, I think that he would be the MVP of the league. I actually had a Sam Darnold comeback player of the year bet at plus 8,000 that I cashed out of today just because I 35x'd what I put down. Turned like 5 into 150. The payout was like 400, but I just think Burrow's going to get this award at this point. Lamar Jackson, he is 1 touchdown pass away from 40 touchdowns and like, what is it, 3 interceptions. The guy's an absolute beast. And Josh Allen, I lean slightly over Patrick Mahomes just because of the interceptions for Mahomes this year, plus what Allen has done from a rushing aspect. But I do think that that is a close 3-4. I know a lot of people are complaining about Mahomes not getting in because from a talent perspective, yes, if I was starting a franchise today, I would take Patrick Mahomes. But I think Pro Bowl should be encapsulating what you did in that season. And statistically, I think the AFC got it right there. The NFC, I think Jared Goff is for sure a lock here. He had, you know, one of the better seasons of all NFC quarterbacks for sure, and led all the potential NFC quarterbacks that we're going to talk about in passing yards, completion percentage, and passer rating. The guy was absolutely really, really good in that spot. Baker Mayfield would have been my number 2 selection here. And when it comes down to would it be Jaden Daniels, Sam Darnold, or Baker Mayfield, who's the odd man out? Well, Baker Mayfield this year was 4,600 total yards for his team, 42 touchdowns, and the guy had a really, really solid completion percentage over 70%. Baker was solid. The interceptions were a little high, 15 interceptions, but Baker's got that gunslinger to him, and he led this Tampa team despite injuries. They're 1 win away from it, which is why I don't like doing this Pro Bowl voting a week before the season ends, because if Baker completes leading this team to the playoffs, to me, he should be no doubt honored as a Pro Bowler. So then it comes to me, do we get rid of Sam Darnold or do we get rid of Jaden Daniels? Obviously, from pure passing stats, Jaden Daniels, you know, trails Sam Darnold by 600 passing yards. But in terms of rushing, it kind of evens out how much they provided to their team. Both got about 4,300 yards. You know, Darnold's got about 2 more touchdowns than Sam Darnold overall. Jaden's got less interceptions. Do you value the team success of the Minnesota Vikings potentially being the 1 seed, or do you value what Jaden has done more for his team in terms of valuability, right? Because I don't think anybody would argue that Jaden Daniels has been more valuable to the Commanders this year than Sam Darnold has been valuable to the Vikings. But I also think if the Vikings get the 1 seed and the numbers are close, you have to go Darnold. A little part of me hates doing it this week because if I had to pick right now, I don't feel like I've collected all the information. And I feel like I'm giving a faulty vote because if Baker leads the Bucs to winning that division, I think he certainly deserves to be in. But when we start comparing Daniels and Darnold, it's like, well, I think Daniels has been the more talented player this year and has been more valuable to his team. But I also think you could say that the gap in valuability becomes a lot closer if this Sunday night Sam Darnold leads the Vikings into Detroit and they go in, win that game, and secure the number 1 seed in home field throughout the NFC. So I feel like it's asinine having to pick. And I almost think that that reason is what led to Baker being snubbed here. Truthfully, if you had, gun to my head, you got to pick Jaden or Darnold. I would lean Jaden right now, even though I think the Vikings are going to win, just because I haven't seen it happen yet. But again, for any Vikings fans coming at me in the comment section, again, if I got to vote after week 18, which is what it's supposed to be, because the Pro Bowl is supposed to be an encapsulation of the whole season, and this is a close race here, it's just annoying and it's tough. And I think the NFL got a lot of things wrong this year. And, I think they got plenty right, but I think there were some egregious snubs. I think Baker being snubbed was wrong. I think Brian Thomas being snubbed was wrong. Leonard Williams being snubbed was wrong. Van Noy being snubbed was wrong. Danielle Hunter should have been on that ballot. So there's a lot of guys that I do think should have made. James Cook should have made the cut, but they didn't. And this quarterback thing really pisses me off because announcing it, JJ Watt tweeted about this. He said these Pro Bowls being announced a week before the season ends tells you all you need to know. And a lot of it's a popularity contest. And Baker's maybe not the most popular around the league because he's a little cocky. And you could see with some of the guys that are getting in, like Max Crosby getting in, that feels like a little bit of a popularity and a namesake thing. So at the end of the day, I get it. It's just Pro Bowls and the All-Pro matters way more. But these are my thoughts on it. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. If you love the NFL, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I will catch you guys next time. Peace.